Graham, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with your group. And thank you everyone for turning up. Um, I want to see this as more of not me telling you what the world's like, but us discussing what we think the world's like. So I see my role today as basically to add some different perspectives and to stimulate a conversation. It is meant to be apolitical. Some of the um, ideas and views I put forward may appear political, but I don't believe we need to fight this on a political battle. We have a lot of work to do to get towards this inspiring future, and it's a question of collaboration rather than ideology. Um, so if you can wait for the questions for the end, please put them in the Q&A, or hopefully there'll be enough time to have a good conversation. So uh, this is a bit about me. I've been in this game for about 20 years. Prior to this, I was um, sort of a senior figure in IT world, IT consulting, business continuity, setting up and running organizations across EMEA and Africa, and pretty much damaging the planet as much as I could with about 7 or 8 flights a week. Um, Funnily enough, I got fed up of doing that, so I decided to choose a different pathway back in 2002-3. And I've been one of the directors at the Association of Sustainability Practitioners since then. Um, brief. So what the aim today is just to step back from all the technical details and the action lists, etc., and just let's reflect on what the big picture is that we're dealing with. I say delve, we don't have, ages, but I'll go through what I believe are the different roles and relationships and balance that are currently there and what we need to change in order for people like you, particularly, to do the necessary work and actions that will get us where we need to go. Um, and I see the whole challenges all of us have got to create this world we're living in. At the moment, we all are creating quite subconsciously the world we've lived in. But this is not a job for individuals. This is a job for groups of people, citizens, civic bodies. And we need to adapt and change what we're doing because we have got an existential threat facing us. Um, and that I don't know how many of you went to the national emergency briefing or have seen the website since, but I was there and I was both deeply shocked, moved, and inspired. And I think that's an excellent initiative, which I'll refer to at the end. I've got a short clip from one of the more inspiring speakers to add some context to that for people that maybe haven't seen it. And there's no silver bullet. We don't know how to live on a planet sustainably with 8 billion people. It's never been done before. So we've all got to basically go on a learning process, and that's well advanced. Um, so I'm just going to offer some different observations and perspectives rather than dogmatic rules or otherwise. So briefly about ASP, we were created about 21 years ago now as a result of a responsible business practice master's course. The alumni that came out of there wanted to stay together as they went their separate ways. It's now an international collaborative learning community. It's not a network. I'll come back to this again, but networks traditionally are transactional, whereas communities, the best ones, nurture members. They nurture themselves, and that's what ASP is. We're learning how to co-create a world in which future generations can thrive. That's our purpose. And to get there, we can't devise a mechanism or a transition that involves economic, environmental, or social collapse. That's not what our children want. It's not what our grandchildren want. And it's not what we want. So this is not about an anarchistic revolution. We're citizens. We've got responsibilities for those that come after us and our families now. And we have to take that seriously. So adopt a bigger challenge than just coming up with radical ideas. And what we do, ASP as an organization simply connects, challenges, and supports practitioners. Practitioners are people probably like yourself that do this because it's the way you live. It's what you want to, the impact you want to have on the world. Some of us do it professionally, but others do it simply because it's they believe it's their responsibility to create this new world. And what we provide is safe places in which the collaborative learning happens, where ideas can get challenged and addressed, and collaborations can merge, where then people go off and do work together. And we're multi-generational, we're multi-national, and we're multidisciplined. We've got creatives, consultants, coaches, mentors, elders, storytellers, business leaders, academics, students, and everything from Gen Z and millennials to baby boomers like myself. So it's pretty representative, and we need those different perspectives, I think, to make sure we're addressing the needs. What I want to talk today are just three simple things. Very quick summary of where we are today, just a couple of images really, without delving into too much of the detail. More importantly, what are we aiming for? There are thousands of great ideas out there. And the one thing I'll say, I think that is both good and bad about the, if you like, the environmental movement, the sustainability movement, is that there are so many ideas. And that's good because we've got to experiment. There's no silver bullet. And we live in different communities, different cultures. And if we're going to live sustainably, then place and locality is really important. It's got to work for us. It's got to work in Africa. It's got to work in every country. So, in a sense, that's a weakness because there's not one voice and one simple idea. But I will offer some guiding principles that I think we share. And the more important point, how the hell are we going to get there? Because we're stuck with the business as usual model, an economic model now, which is actually representing the existential threat. We've never faced this transition to something radically different, but we have to. And there's some people in the audience that look a little bit like me. They've got some white hairs. We were born into the nuclear Holocaust era. I can remember as a child having nightmares about Russian bombers coming over Norfolk. That's the environment I grew up in. We have so far been successful at addressing that existential threat. I believe we've more or less got that one under control, apart from a few bad actors. What we're facing in the sustainability challenge is just another existential threat that mankind is facing and has traditionally faced. So where are we today? This is both my most horrific and favorite image. This was taken in 2021, and I think this just about summarizes where we are actually. The Earth is burning. This was all the heat domes that hit North America. And while the forests that were largely planted and set up to combat climate change with carbon offsets, etc., are burning, the very mechanism we had put in place to prevent climate change is contributing to it because of climate change. You know, it's an ironic picture. And then on the left-hand side, there's two people. I don't know what they're thinking, but they look quite relaxed, just staring at the world burning. And there's three other guys just playing golf as if nothing's happening. And I think this is a pretty accurate picture of what's going on at the moment. The people that are doing the work are obviously at office, but there's a lot of people now just watching while all this happens. In some way, they don't feel the agency and the urgency to actually address it. I suspect none of us share that view. I think all of us here today are here because we know there's something to do and we're committed to it. Some sad facts. Where are we today? The climate impacts are not coming tomorrow. They've really been hitting us for the last 10 years. And in 2021-22, it was really clear that almost every country in the world is now suffering obvious impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. I see the two as being two sides of the same coin. In the Hajj in 2021, 3,000 people died of heat exposure. 3,000 people in a weekend. There's never been anything like that in any of the Hajjs. Florida was decimated, southern Europe, particularly Valencia, Germany. These places were being hit by events that were called once in a lifetime. No, that's the historic view. They were once in a lifetime. They're now probably once a year. One way of looking at where we are today is this is the best year in the rest of our life. Climate change is getting worse every year now, and the impacts, as we were discussing with tomato plants, are there for all to see. It's not academic anymore, it's real. The oceans are boiling. We've got threats of the AMOC changing. If the Atlantic currents change, we're in deep trouble. And they are changing. And there's almost nothing we can do about that. The statistic I heard last year, 3,000 people in Britain died directly from climate change impacts. 3,000 people. It's here on our doorstep. Species are vanishing. The COPs are failing. The oil companies have gleefully admitted they hijacked this year's COP or last year's COP, and they've now got them under control. They are not decreasing or aiming to decrease their production. So CO2 levels have always been increasing and still are. And there's not much sign of that changing. That's quite a depressing prospect. Okay, so let's look at what we're aiming for. Let's not look at the problem. Let's try and focus on what the solutions are that are emerging. They're not academic anymore. There are real solutions emerging. First, what do we want to get to? And this is one thing that's lacking, I think, is a coherent, single, inspiring vision of what we want to get to. The good news is there are lots of them, but it's fragmenting the communication. And one of the main things we've got to do is communicate amongst ourselves and to the rest of the community. What are we aiming for, especially for younger generations? I've got grandchildren. I've got children, obviously. I don't want them to have fewer opportunities than I did. And my generation in Britain is the first generation whose children will have fewer opportunities than we did. I believe we've got to reverse that. We've got to come up with an inspiring vision that serves the long term and also serves the short term. We don't want to be going backwards on this. We don't go back to anything. We need to go forward to an inspiring future. And that's got to be built on social justice, geographic justice. You know, the colonial model is largely the cause of the current situation. We've got to address that. And there's got to be generational justice. Why should our children have less opportunities than we did? And I believe the answer is thriving communities, not people that are frightened to fly or frightened to eat meat or frightened to do this, frightened to this. No, we've got to weave these into a way of living that allows good futures, good lives, and good ways of living, which people are inspired by. And they feel they're thriving, not just surviving. And fundamentally, none of that is possible unless the systems we're creating are in harmony and balance with nature. And this is quite often overlooked, and I'll address this later. And what are we aiming for? Well, there's lots of definition of the word sustainability. I'll come to some of them, but fundamentally what I'm talking about is why can't we create a world in which there's enough for everyone forever? I didn't make this phrase up. I was given it by one of my friends who's a sustainability manager. The beauty of this is I believe everyone under the planet can understand what those four words mean. It's not scientific, it's not technocratic, it's not ideological. It's just saying that as human beings, wouldn't it be nice if we had enough for ourselves and for everybody, and for that to be sustainable? So that's the rallying cry that we at ASP have focused on. And this transition from where we are today to where we want to get to tomorrow, we must set down these three criteria. No social or economic collapse. We faced this during COVID. We survived. A lot of people didn't. It was hell for a lot of people. We don't want to be designing a transition process that involves those again. So let's do the Kennedy thing. Let's go for the big, ambitious goal. So the transition must, as well as the system, must not involve social or economic collapse. we cannot survive environmental collapse. So that is the ultimate thing we have to avoid. So how are we going to get there? Some of you may understand this picture, seen it before. It's what's called the egocentric view. I call it the patriarchal centric view because men, not mankind, is put at the top of this ecological system. And this is broadly where we are today. Most of the systems we've got have been developed from the patriarchal model, mostly by men, and largely on this idea that we can dominate the planet, that it's just incidental, it's there just at our whim to do the way we want. And that is the fundamental problem we're dealing with, this disconnect from nature and the lack of understanding of how we're all totally dependent upon nature. There's no question about it in my mind. The world can support 8 or 10 billion people comfortably. What it can't support is our current lifestyle. So the lifestyle has to change. If the lifestyle has to change, we have to go back to the foundations on which that lifestyle has been created. So what I believe we need to do is move to what this is called the ecocentric model, where we see Gaia, the Earth, as a complex set of complex systems of which we are just one element. And here, the male and the female side of humanity is again divided, but there's no hierarchy here. This is a system, I think this accurately reflects Gaia, and it's what we've got to move to. And the thinking that goes along with this phrase in the, I got from a book called Time of the Black Jaguar, which is based on Peruvian healers, indigenous wisdom. And they have a saying that says, when we forget to nurture what nurtures us, everything decays. And that, I believe, is the underlying problem with this egocentric model. We've forgotten that we've got to respect nature. So a switch to understanding our role in nature, when we learn to nurture what nurtures us, everything thrives. So that's the sort of the rallying call, if you like. And of course, the thing that nurtures us is nature. And we have to start working very much more than we have in the past on respecting that. So let's revisit this, what is sustainability? Because the word's bandied about. If we say that it's learning, it's got to be built on learning how to nurture what nurtures us. So taking nature as a community of systems and species, etc. They're all interconnected, they're all interrelated. Humans are the one species that have moved out of that. So we've got to, I believe, go back to this idea that nature is the center of everything we do. It's the starting point. It's got to be living in harmony and balance with that, whatever the system is that we produce. It's got to have enough for everyone forever. To get there, we have to change the way we're thinking. One of our members came up with a statement that sustainability is the outcome of conscious thinking. So this word's been hijacked. You can't have a sustainable company. The term does not make sense. You can't have a sustainable product. It's a meaningless combination of words. And this is why it's been hijacked. This is why we have to reclaim that word or come up with a different word that means more accurately what we're wanting. So let's think about that. If we're going to start designing a new system, first of all, and we see this today in our politics, politics is just anchored on this idea that we must have simple sound bites. You know, it's all the small boats, it's the immigrants, it's this, it's that. Just stop oil. These are all statements that are thrown about. And I think confuse the situation. Wendell Holmes said a long time ago, you know, I wouldn't give a fig for simplicity this side of complexity, but I give my right arm for simplicity the other side. And I know companies that have adopted this themselves. What they're saying is, we want simple solutions and ideas, but they've got to be based on a deep understanding of what the complexity of the systems is we're dealing with. Otherwise, they will always fail. And that's one of the founding principles of our work. And this is the other one. Buckminster Fuller, I'm sure you're familiar with this. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model, makes the existing model obsolete. And that is happening today, particularly with the younger generations who are doing this instinctively. but people of our ages are doing it systematically. We're actually moving away from trying to change a failing system to trying to create from bottom up a different system that's based on different principles, that's designed to have sustainability as its outcome. So this is one look at the business as usual, the corporate model. Our current model is aimed at creating perpetual growth of wealth by exploiting a finite set of natural resources and social resources. That is a failing ideology. It cannot, in the long term, succeed because we're living on a finite planet. So it might serve a short-term purpose, but ultimately it will fail. And I think we're there at the moment. I think we've been there actually for the last 30 years. But capitalism's principles and design criteria, the ones that we've chosen to use, in other words, we can choose different ones, are basically, it's a hierarchical, top-down, centralized control model. It's exactly the same as an army. Why? Because the two things were synonymous when we go back to the East India Company. There were armies invading countries and stealing the resource and subjecting the populations because they wanted to create commerce that could extract nature freely and use slave labor. We've perpetuated that corporate model now. It's based on competition. I win, you lose. It's winner takes all. Net zero sum game. Fundamentally, since the Second World War, it's based on consumerism. Just keep manufacturing cheap, poor quality products that have a limited lifestyle and get thrown away so that we get more sales, get more growth. We needed that after the Second World War. It served a very valuable purpose to get the armies back into civilian life and the factories back into providing products for the civilian world. But it's outgrown its purpose now. And it's focused on wealth creation for a few. Up to the 1970s, it was pretty equal, but the inequality has rapidly grown since then to the system we see in the States at the moment, whereby 2,500 billionaires and trillionaires have now dominating the whole political and financial scene and political scene. And it's extractive. There is no attempt in the current corporate model to replace the resources that they're using. So fundamentally, just one view of it, it's past its best before date. The negatives are outgrowing the positives. And it's now the existential threat. So an antidote. Let's look at sustainable communities. A sustainable future is built upon the following principles and is being built out today. We're seeing this with purpose-led businesses that are designed to create environmental and social benefits, as well as making a profit. But profit is not the goal. Profit is a necessary constraint. If you don't make a profit, your business is out of business. So it's aimed at creating well-being, both for people and the planet. And the younger generations that I work with simply will not tolerate a different business model. They're not going to wreck their future by building extractive businesses. They're not going to diminish people. And the important thing is we've got to learn to live within our planetary boundaries. So capitalism 2.0, there's nothing wrong with capitalism, just the version we got is outlived its purpose. So the new capitalism being built on communities, communal, local, decentralized thinking and action. And we're seeing a lot of this with simple examples, citizens' assemblies, Transition Town, Agenda 21. These are all movements created by local people who are now doing a lot more in the local communities to address the imbalance we've got. It's based on collaboration. It's based on win-win-win. I win, you win, the planet wins. It's based on us being citizens, not consumers. We're not just here to buy products. We're here to create stronger communities. And the outcome has got to be well-being of nature and society. And one characteristic, I believe, of good communities is that they do nurture the elements within the community. They take the responsibility of caring for and a caring about more than just the individual, which is the corporate model. Corporate model is based on individualism, and this communities model is based on communal citizenship. And fundamentally, it's regenerative. It's not just living within the boundaries. He's actually, and we're in this process now of creating regenerative business models, agricultural models, wildlife situations, and I'm sure many of you are involved in these activities. And fundamentally, it's designed to serve the long term as well as the short term. These are conscious decisions. And the reason we can't take the old model to that very easily, and basically most businesses are designed to, or attempting to be less unsustainable. And they can only do that because I've got a Fiat 500. No matter what I do to it, it's never going to win a Formula One race. The current corporate model is designed to be unsustainable, and it succeeds at that. It's important for it to reduce its impact, but it can never become sustainable. That's why we need a completely different way of thinking. And there's lots of good news out there, new alternatives. I'm sure you've all heard of donut economics, Kate Raworth's creation. There are councils around Britain, around Europe, that are using this as their fundamental economic model. They're designing the way they work to live within the planetary boundaries. You can't get that on day one. It's a journey, but it's the design principle that they're using. And this is being adopted now widely. The other thing is a six-stakeholder model. This concentric circle model just basically says that every business, every council is created within the economy. The economy is part of the community, and the community is part of the environment. There's nothing happens on this planet that doesn't happen within the environment. So this stakeholder model, which has been introduced about a decade ago, is now becoming current. It's a similar model being used in B Corps, but a lot of the organizations I work with adopt this. And it recognizes six stakeholder groups, not just shareholder groups. The environment, community, investors, business partners and suppliers. Note, it don't include the word business competitors. It's a collaborative economic model, staff and clients. And the idea is that any organization is totally dependent on all these six stakeholders for input to their operation, for products, for people, for safe roads, whatever it is. They draw down from the community and the environment to run their organization. And a sustainable business model means that you create more benefits for those entities than you take from them. That's incredibly difficult to do on a small scale. But when we look at communities, then it's possible. The idea is that the outcome to be sustainable, the benefits must replenish and exceed the dependencies, and the benefits must be good for the stakeholders. Creating benefits, not extraction. And if we do that, then we can achieve a balance where the company does well. By well, I mean hit its financial targets, makes a profit, gets the revenue, and functions well as an economic unit. And this model is being adopted now. And it's not a panacea, but the progress is being made. This is one example in Wales. This is River Simple, that designed their entire governance structure to be based on those six stakeholder groups. And it produces these hydrogen cell two-seater vehicles, which you can lease, you can't buy. And this is their model. The board of directors is just one part of the governance structure. They've created separate individual companies to represent each of the stakeholders. They have a steward that's assigned to each of those, and the board's responsibility, the individual responsibility of the board members, is to create benefits for all stakeholders without preference. And in doing so, they will then become the most valued organization by the stakeholders, the most valuable they can ever become, and they'll return the maximum benefits, particularly for the investors who have a real trouble with this model because they don't have the authority to say where the money goes. And this model is now being applied globally as well in small areas, but it's a recognized business model. Victoria Hearth, formerly Plymouth University and now Cambridge, is repurposing marketing, saying that marketing isn't the precursor to sales. It's not there to sell products. It's there to actually create a business model and a governance structure that creates well-being and works on regenerative extraction And therefore, the purpose of marketing is to promote the values and principles on which the company is built. We've seen organizations like Patagonia pioneer and struggle with this model, but they're still pioneering with it. So they're encouraging people to buy products that are built on the right principles from companies who have the right, hopefully the ones that will come up with the sustainable solutions we want. So basically, these models are there. And if you are starting a company today, you can either go and set up a conventional limited company, or you can literally pick up the standards, the the the, the actual tools and tech that are supported by those systems to create a totally sustainable business, not from the outset, but it's designed to have sustainable outcomes. So the solutions are there. They weren't there 15, 20 years ago. It's a massive move. Um, so let's get on to the national emergency briefing. As I say, I felt this was one of the most important things I've ever seen. I felt this was leadership coming from the community. This was individuals, Simon and Nigel Aldridge, who decided that something has to be done because the governments aren't. Governments globally and large corporations globally are stepping back from the net zero targets. They're diluting them, they're walking away from them. That in itself is an indication that that is not leadership. That's just when it tough gets going, they're backing off. And you've got to empathize and sympathize to some extent because we haven't yet got the models that don't allow us to navigate the short term successfully. And we have to do that. So there's this conflict arising now between short term and long term. And for me, what the briefing did, it offered 10 different perspectives about what the reality is of what we're facing. And for me, the big takeaway was that I came away from there actually relieved now that I knew how desperate a situation we're actually in. And as the guy from the national security said, it's important to recognize the challenge that's actually in front of us, the threat we're really facing, not one that we want to face. So it's allowed us, I think, to focus on this. And the idea is that this was a demonstration of how their call is for the government to actually unite, as we did in 1939, to face then a much smaller threat than we're facing now, and actually unite all the political powers to resolve this situation quickly, but not in ideas that, if you like, were born in the tree-hugging eco world, but to focus on redefining GDP, redefining the terms they use and accept now, so that using specific actions that they saw relevant in each of their areas, the politicians can navigate their way through the next 10 to 15 years, increasing GDP by focusing on the industries we need to get us out of there and dropping the industries, i.e. the oil industries that are causing the problems, and to start reporting back to people on what the actual progress is on this. And at best, this is patchy. Britain still probably leads the world in this, but we see already political voices saying we can't afford climate change actions, we can't afford net zero. We can't afford not to. That's the reality. So it all ended on positive, inspiring ideas that could lead us and help the politicians to lead us out of the challenge. And the list here in the middle, there were speakers about nature, what is happening in nature in Britain, what's the truth about climate, what's happening with weather extremes, science of tipping points and how we're approaching that at the moment, food, and then the social aspects of food security, the health system, national security. It's the first time I've heard the military say that in their doctrine now, they're putting climate change as the number one existential threat to national security. When a bunch of hard-nosed military people say that, you know there's a sea change happening. And the health, which I'll come back to, a speaker from the NHS saying quite categorically, if we do not take radical action in the next 15 years, the NHS will not exist because the support structure around it in society won't exist. These are hard lessons to hear. but then talks about how the economic models can change and how the energy transition can happen. So if I've done this correctly, we should be able. I'm going to just unshare for a second because I'm not sure I shared with the sound on. So do forgive me 1 second. No, right. So this is Professor Hugh Montgomery, and I'll go in just the last 4 minutes of his talk.
You're going to hear more about that later. But these are the problems. Without a functioning economy, without food supply available to us, we cannot run a health service, we cannot have health. And I'm not going to be trying to give everyone else's talks, but let's just pick up on a few of those issues. We're losing somewhere around $10,000 a second to extreme weather events, to ones we definitely can attribute to climate change. We're already at around $4,500 a second being lost to the global economy. And as you've heard, things don't stop if we just stop emitting. Heating will continue. We're committed to a loss of 20% of the global economy already. That is going to be gone, and it will be gone now in a little over 20 years. Moving forwards, economists are warning us we may lose 50% or north of our global economy. Without that, we don't have an education system. We sure as hell don't have a health service. This isn't just the scientists. Let's look at what actuaries say. The actuaries, the people who do the maths, or math if you're American, on the risk faced by insurance companies. I won't read that out to you. These are statements directly from actuaries. As they pointed out in the foreword to their report, this isn't some minor rounding error. We heard Paul talking about food, and he alluded to this report from Food Seniors. So this isn't just coming from scientists like Tim and others. It's not coming from just ecologists, such as Chris Packham. It's not just coming from actuaries and from food industry people as well as academics. It's coming across the suite. And that was summarised in the State of the Climate report from last year, which made the following statements. So I recognise an emergency. This is one. We have not been treating it as one. We've had these sorts of warnings too, which we ignored. Not that this might upset our tummies a bit with a bit of salmonella, or that we might get dengue. There may be no livable future for us and our children. The point was made earlier. We haven't got time for doing a little bit of recycling. We need transformational change now, if we're going to survive. There are some policy wins, because as we also pointed out at one of the Lancet Commissions, action on climate change brings great benefits economically and to health as well. And Paul has alluded to some of those. If you look, for instance, at active transport and getting rid of particulate pollution, but using physical activity to move, getting rid of gas boilers and so forth, which reduces particulate pollution, and moving to the plant-based diet that Paul alluded to, you get wins on all of these sorts of disease states, which are the bread and butter in every hospital in the country, for which your taxes pay. We can transform the health of the nation, and we can make our NHS actually sustainable in its own right. There are huge wins if we change to active transport, quite modestly, by changes in policy. So these are fiscal wins, whether you're to the right or the left of the political agenda. This just makes sense. If we look at the food, to which Paul alluded, the impacts on respiratory health, cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, and more. If we make these moves to the WHO recommended diet, the plant-based diet, we get longer lives, lower emissions, and enormous cash savings. And if you just look at the contribution to obesity, if we fix that, that would save this country £126 billion a year. That's enough to take 12% off the base rate of income tax. So, I'm going to finish. We've had an honest conversation. I am scared. I'm 63. I may not have that much longer left on the planet, but I'm scared for my own life and future, and I'm absolutely terrified for that of my son, and you should be too. Is this an emergency? It is an emergency. Now it is an emergency, and it requires treatment. This is no longer a risk. Without action, these impacts are certainties, and the hazards are catastrophic. If we take action, we might survive to leave the hospital. If we do not, the outcome is absolutely certain. So I leave you with this thought: the climate emergency is a health emergency, and it's about time we started treating this one.
Quite sobering stuff, quite frightening, but as you see, there are positives there. There are ways out. So the three key messages that all the different speakers provided, absolutely with clarity, no ambiguity. Governments must listen to the scientists. The COVID report was released 2 weeks before this. The Eat Out to Help Out that Sunak introduced, in that report, 23,000 deaths were attributed to that one action that he didn't consider needed reference back to the science. As the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he felt the economy was his purvey, and he made a decision. And I'm not saying anyone could have outguessed that and done better, but if he'd listened to the scientists, we wouldn't have had that. So they're saying, do not make that mistake again. The scientists are on your side, government, listen to them. And brief the public regularly on the progress towards it. This is not a debate about whether we've got climate change or not, or whether we can afford it or not. It's a question of, are we going to act? And if so, what's the consequence of actions today? And what are we planning to do tomorrow? The project is running, whether we like it or not. The government needs to realign itself and take responsibility for communicating. And they were quite open about this. One of the major reasons we're here at the moment is that basically in the political arena, the corporate fossil fuel lobbyists and corporates are bribing politicians. They are paying them to produce reports. They are paying them to support pumping fossil fuel at a rate that is way beyond extinction level. So it was pretty hard hitting, but very positive. So how are we going to get the fundamental shifts? There are reasons to be cheerful. Most of the symptoms and problems are fine if we can sort out not addressing the symptoms, but address the problems. Climate change is a symptom of a problem. If we do not address the underlying causes of climate change and we just reduce the carbon temporarily, it will come back and bite us. We have to do the latter. We have to reduce the carbon going into and taking out of the climate, but we also have to stop the long-term systemic factors that increase the carbon in the first place. The good news is, in a systemic system like ours, you address one problem, you address them all. The same actions that will save biodiversity loss and will prevent climate change work across the system on all the threats. So it's not a whole bunch of individual actions. Simple actions can actually drastically affect many different problems. And this is one thing that I've only come across in the last year or two. A lot of people in business still see nature as just something else. The truth of the matter is, every single industry and business and council is dependent 100% on the health of nature It is the universal infrastructure, and we don't talk about it as infrastructure. Venture capitalists love investing in infrastructure, roads, rail, airports, whatever. Let them invest in nature, regenerative projects, good community-based projects, regenerative farming, cleaning rivers, cleaning the land. Because if they do that, all their other investments will be de-risked. Some venture capitalists are realizing that now, but it's still not widely believed. So restoring nature, biodiversity gain, food production gains, economic gains, social gains, flood mitigations, all these problems that you guys are facing day by day will be eased if the other half of our society, the corporates, also align themselves with what you're doing. And we've got to build those resilient, thriving communities of not just human communities, but natural ones. And we've seen this like circular economy, future guardian, post-growth, regenerative business models. These are all happening now, and I'm sure these occupy a lot of your time at the moment. And the last one by the new innovative entrepreneurs, the Gen Zs and millennials are flocking to this. Not a majority, but way beyond the tipping point levels. New social norms are developing. People are actively talking about increasing well-being, not just profit. You'll be dealing with active travel initiatives. I work with that in BCP. They're not brilliant, but they're laying down the foundations for that. They're offering people alternatives that will help the NHS. We're looking at equality and equity. Recycling, reusing, repairing are now just common ideas. Are they perfect? No. Are they being improved? Yes. Regenerative practices are coming in, and we are getting this message across that if you want to invest wisely in this earth, invest in nature first. And this is Elizabeth Warren. This is at least 20 years ago. I'll read it to you because it's difficult to see on the screen. This is a plea for businesses to respect the community, the civic side. There is nobody in this country who got rich on his own. Nobody. You built a factory out there. Good for you. But I want to be clear. You moved your goods to market on the roads the rest of us paid for. You hired workers the rest of us paid to educate. You're safe in your factory because police forces and fire forces that the rest of us paid for. You didn't have to worry that marauding bands would come and seize everything at our factory. Now look, you built a factory and it turned into something good, terrific, or a great idea. God bless. Keep a big hunk of it. But part of the underlying social contract is you take a hunk of that and pay it forward for the next kid who comes along. My objection to dealing with chains in the food industry is that they aren't paying their local taxes. They are parasitic on our communities. You are practically bankrupt as organizations. You need to be getting a much bigger slice of corporate funding, corporate taxes to enable you to do the work that you need to do and you want to do. And, this call from Elizabeth Warren, I think, puts that in context. So let's face it, corporates cannot be sustainable. They're designed to be extractive. They've got to pay their way. But what's the role of civic society? I think we've got to work in harmony and balance. And I know you're trying to do that, but I don't see that that's well understood by the corporates, especially the big international players. The Yahoos, the Amazons. Are they paying local rates? Are they paying local taxes? We are the part of the whole society that can compensate. It's our job to create healthy, sustainable communities, both natural and social ones. And we've got to be seen as that yin and yang, that other half that helps the companies who give us the products we need in unsustainable ways. We will pick up slack. We will create at scale and rapidly the systems that compensate for their extractive, depleted models. And that's, I believe, the importance of the local governments and the central governments, who by many people are just being scorned at the moment. But I think we've got to get that clear. And everything you do, regenerative practices, the active travel, circularity, recycling, repairing, and the social services, these are all vital in that role of what we heard in the national emergency briefing of moving our systems into the sustainable space. So what are your thoughts? We haven't got much time left, I'm afraid, but over to you now. So I'll stop sharing and throw the floor over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Gwyn. That's like all my conversations with you, I'm equally terrified and exhilarated. So well done. You've been a real roller coaster ride today. I do have one specific question for you, which is a general question. How is it that the young people nowadays are so much more understanding than we were? How is it that they are actually focused on capitalism 2.0? Do we know where they're getting it from? Because they certainly aren't getting it from school, are they? Where are they getting it? Do you know?
When I left university, there was no conversation about this. You just joined big corporations. There was a few people, Rachel Castle, Schumacher, that were talking about it, but it was the tree huggers. Go on to 2000. Stern report in 2006 publicised what was actually happening. The awareness has risen increasingly. The students I work with now, I'd say about 10 or 15% of them just know that they have no future if we carry on. It's public discourse. So XR, Just Stop Oil, David Attenborough, Greta Thunberg, they may have been controversial, but they got the message home, right? There is a problem. The world is on fire. They know that. And the big difference I see, Graham, is that people like me and you have to unlearn what we were taught at university and in business before we can act. They're short-circuiting that. They're rejecting oil companies. They're rejecting corporates when they leave universities. They're setting up their own businesses. They don't know how to be successful, but they do know they're not going to join in the destruction of their future. And the suicide rate of young people in Britain is appalling. The most dangerous person to a young person today is themselves. Suicide is the most common cause of death for young people. Part of that is eco-anxiety. It's all sorts of other things as well. But they know about this, they are aware. So that's my hopefully short answer to that. Stuart, you've got your hand up. Would you like to?
Oh, hi. Yes, thanks. That's a great talk. I do have many thoughts, and I'd love to go down the pub with you and have a few beers. Um, but just two things sort of struck me. I did have the pleasure of having Hugh Montgomery as a colleague. We were both running
Wow.
London Intensive Care Unit, so I know him quite well, and he made some very good points. But one point I'd like to make is that do you think the national emergency briefing is being suppressed? I know there's a group trying to make it a public sort of television program.
Yeah.
I think they've condensed it down to about 45 minutes. Would like it aired on mainstream media. That
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be happening. The other thing which not isn't happening is MPs aren't signing up to uh, um, ratify.
Yeah. Um, yes and no. I see the world simply as three. There's those people that don't want to listen, and they're not listening, right? That's the large corporates. Some of the political parties aren't listening. There are those people like us. We don't need to be told this. We're doing what we can anyway. It's the people in the middle, the persuadables. What I have seen, the green straws, firstly, it wasn't designed to have instant impact. Simon and Nick weren't that clever, but they are working on it. So the film, I think, should have been made first. So it came out instantly so we can share that. I believe that film should be shown in every university, in every council hall, in every political meeting across the country.
In every school.
Yeah, and schools. I think, I'm not sure. I suffered 2 days of eco-anxiety after that, and I've been in this game 20 years. It was hard for me to come back from that. And I work with a strong support organization. We have to be very careful when we're dealing with young people that we don't terrify them. Right. So I believe the film will be balanced. So I think we've got to, but there are, if I'm following the LinkedIn tracks of the NEB, there are politicians signing up. My MP has signed up to it. There are politicians taking it onto the floor of the House of Commons and the House of Lords and debating it. they are the minority, but it is making some impact. I think it's a bit like that 2009 with David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg and XR. It's created the cracks where more light is getting into the system. Is it the panacea? No, but it's a damn good start. And I think we have to amplify and magnify the impacts as much as we can. So I'm always optimistic, Stuart.
I'm glad somebody is.
Anyone else would like to add a comment or a question?
I must say, I thought there was going to be a whole deluge of enthusiasm or horror at what you've been saying.
Well, I could try another question, and that is,
Kristen's got one.
I take on board your sort of rosy view that we can change things, we can introduce donut economics, we can curb corporate sort of greed and things. But I think the thing that is really only going to change it is major political shift to try and do things like limit the fossil fuel companies, don't give any more licenses, mandate the move to EVs, which seems to be slipping, keep the pressure on for the net zero targets, fine companies or tax CO2 production. Major political changes, which aren't going to happen. I draw a lot of parallels with the industrial military machine. They have persisted certainly in America after the Second World War. Most countries powered down their industrial military machinery. America didn't. And it is a major part of the financial infrastructure of America is based on arms dealing. I think they get 40 or 50% of all government spending is in some way spent on the military. And the amount the military spend on lobbying government and the amount of the military which migrate from the Pentagon into government, they seem to be controlling the whole thing, and there are no breaks or limitations on it.
Yeah. Stuart, I'll just put down there to want Tristan and Ken, but I'm not an optimist and I've given up hope. I have evidence that it's happening. Literally, I see the young people every day. I see the system, so I trust we will get there. It's 50-50 though, but I agree with all the things you've mentioned. Tristram, you had your hand up first, I believe.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you to put this in the context of sort of international, global competition going on in economies. Because I worry if you do this too fast and you say, well, we won't have competition, we'll all work in circular economies, and we'll stop using oil. The danger is that our national economy will fall behind, for instance, America's. So, yeah. and if the national economy is not vibrant and growing, the danger then is you get civil unrest and mayhem, and it goes backwards. So I think what you've been talking about, I can see it works at a sort of community level. If you've got a strong national economy, local economies can start to do these things. Yeah. But I worry a lot about getting rid of competition and that idea, because otherwise, if you don't have competition, you don't have efficiency.
No, I agree. This is not a question of sweeping away the business as usual. It's a way of we have to compensate for its inadequacies. Because a lot of people young people went to businesses 20 years ago knew there was problems, didn't know there was other models, but they're the people that want to change the way the business works. The big corporates will never change the way they work. They will always be there. The simple thing is we cannot afford not to do any of this, or we won't have any economy. The whole thing.
Can I just interrupt you there? I think the big corporates can, by your sort of movement, they can be persuaded to act more responsibly, because otherwise they lose sales and lose credibility.
Absolutely.
So I don't agree that we can't have big efficient corporations. We just have to, the guidance for them, the laws have to, and our own feedback, which should push them to be more responsible.
Yeah, what I'm saying, Tristan, we can have efficient companies, but we can't have ones that are sustainable. Therefore, that's a fact. Therefore, we have to compensate for that elsewhere.
Well, why can't they be sustainable if they change their practices?
No, because they're not designed to be sustainable. Systemically, they're not designed to. So we've got to accept that my Fiat 500 is never going to win a Formula One race, but it's still a good car. So we need oil companies to produce oil. We need companies to produce iPhones. We have to compensate for their deficiencies by not flogging them to death and killing them, but by compensating elsewhere. That's the yin and yang. Or we are going to have collapse one way or another. And there's no easy panacea for this. We've got to collaborate with big business to make them less unsustainable, and to where they can't be sustainable, we've got to compensate. So very briefly, Ken, thanks for it's a great question though, Tristan. If we don't solve that, we're not going to get anything.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, just a quick observation, really. There's quite a good growing network now of people who are looking to get the film of the NEB shown. So, for example, my parish council, I've got them to agree to show it in the village hall, and we'll be spreading that around local parish councils as well. And there are people looking at working with Dorset Council now, actually getting them involved. They seem to be on board, and I think this is the way. When enough people see it, I think there will be a huge push then for change from people. I would like to hope. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and the politicians will follow those people. They're the leaders. They will say what they want clearly. That's where the votes are. So, and that will help with what Tristan's talking about. The political parties will align with the wishes of the people if we speak up. And that's part of my evidence. I see a lot of. Thanks, Ken. That's great. Graham.
I was just taken by Tristram's comment and reminded that back in the first Trump administration, when he started chopping the EPA to bits and reducing their specifications, a lot of American corporates decided to go ahead and continue to implement the old standards before they got chopped down. So I think there is a willingness amongst corporates nowadays to fall in line with what could be called greenwashing, but I think that they are beginning to feel that actually they do have an obligation to the planet. So there's a bit of hope there, I see. And of course, Bucky Fuller was very prominent in American thinking, and hopefully his ideas will still continue to catch on.
Yeah, and I think we've got to move away from the sort of the binary situation that a lot of us got stuck in. We don't need everybody to have a spiritual awakening. We need enough people to design the systems that the other people will use. So a lot of people that drive EV cars don't give a crap about the planet. They do like cheap travel. The systems being designed so that they can live sustainably without any ideological shift. So we just have to ensure there's enough people focusing on the right developments to cause the tipping points that will shift our economies and our corporate and our ways of living over to sustainable ways of living. The average person that works in a delivery company or a supermarket, they're not going to engage in this sort of conversation. They do want systems that work. And if we can provide those that are designed by and built by companies that themselves are aiming for sustainability, that's the way out of this. So we must start using some instead of all. Some people are, some businesses are, and we've got to encourage those pioneers to experiment and be brave enough to try things differently. Or otherwise, if we just carry on doing the same thing, we'll end up with the same results. So it's very complex.
Mm.
Great questions, anyway.
It's good to see the ball beginning to start rolling.
And what I would say, I'm really pleased to see so many Dorset-based councillors here, council staff, because I've worked with BCP Council, Poole Council, and Bournemouth Council for years, and they're the most enjoyable organisations to work with. They've got some of the best people I've ever worked with, and they're really dedicated to this, completely hamstrung by the constraints they're under. So I'll pick up Stuart's thing. If anyone's around here for a drink, I'm happy for a coffee or a beer anytime.
Good. Well, if there are no further questions or points, Gwyn, thank you so much for coming along this afternoon. I thought it was a really wonderful presentation. I did enjoy it, as well as being terrified by it. And I look forward to seeing where we go in the future. And I'm due to go and visit friends in Scotland in a couple of months' time because we're frightened that they're going to fall off the perch before we get to see them. So I'll just have to convince my wife that the route to Scotland from the Isle of Wight is through Poole, so that we can have that coffee or beer or whatever.
Absolutely. There'll be another time. And Stuart, I believe you're recording this. I'll be very happy to put the recording of this up on ASP's website as well to spread your work, because this is clearly a great idea you've got here, to get all these people together. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your listening and for your comments and questions today. It's been really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, Gwyn.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
thank you all so much, and see you next
Thanks,
week.
Graham.
And thank you for your time and trouble. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Graham.
Bye.